The money was supposed to be my safety net. $50,000 every overtime shift. Every weekend I skipped seeing friends. Every time I told myself next year for a vacation. I didn't have a fiancé yet, but I had a plan. A small wedding when the right person came along, debt-free, with enough left to start a life without relying on anyone. It was the one thing that was entirely mine. That morning I woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen. Not the normal low murmur of coffee and breakfast, but raised tones, sharp and deliberate. I stepped out of my room and froze halfway down the hall. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where were you watching this video. My dad was sitting at the table with my envelope in his hands. Ryan, my older brother, leaned against the counter, grinning like he'd just been handed a prize. My mom stood beside him, sipping her tea, smirk curling at the edge of her mouth. "You're giving it to him," Dad said without preamble. I blinked. "Excuse me?" He held up the envelope like evidence in court. He needs it for his wedding. A proper family wedding. Your brother's starting his life, you're not even close." I stepped forward, heart pounding. "That's mine. I've been saving for years." Mom's eyes slid over me, dismissive. "And you'll save again. You don't have anyone to marry. Ryan does. This is how family works. We help each other." I shook my head. Help doesn't mean stealing. Dad's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, slow and deliberate. "You're going to walk over here and thank us for letting you contribute." Ryan chuckled under his breath like it was all a big joke. Something in me snapped. "You're insane if you think—" The words cut off when Dad moved faster than I expected. His hand slammed into my side, a sharp, crushing blow that sent pain ripping through my ribs. I staggered back against the wall, a choked sound escaping before I could stop it. White-hot pain radiated through my chest with every breath. Mom laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, stop pretending you're hurt. He barely touched you." Ryan didn't laugh, but he didn't step in either. He just walked over, plucked the envelope from Dad's hand, and tucked it into his jacket. "You could have just said yes," he muttered. I gripped the wall, willing myself not to cry, not from pain, not from rage. Dad pointed a finger at me. "You'll get over it, and you'll thank me someday when you understand what family means." They left the kitchen together like a team walking off a playing field after a win. The slam of the front door rattled through the house. I stood there alone, my breath shallow from the throbbing in my ribs, my mind replaying every second. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they decided I didn't matter, that I was expendable, that my years of work meant nothing if they wanted what was mine. They'd taken before my time, my dignity, my space, but never like this. Never something they knew I'd fought to keep. I eased myself into a chair, one hand pressed to my ribs. The pain grounded me, kept me from spinning out. Because buried under the hurt, under the disbelief, something else was taking root. Not a plan, not yet. But the certainty that whatever came next wouldn't be a plea for them to give it back. No, this time they'd lose more than money. They'd lose something they didn't even realize could be taken from them. The next few days, I moved slow. Partly because every breath sent a dull ache through my ribs, partly because I needed them to think I was broken. If they believed I'd accepted it, they wouldn't see what I was doing in the background. At work, I stayed late, not for overtime, but to use the quiet hours when no one would bother me. I started a list not of things I could take from them, but of things they couldn't survive losing. For my dad, it was his standing at the local contractors association, the network that got him every job and kept his business afloat. For my mom, it was her little empire of favors, the web of neighbors, club ladies, and charity connections she could call on for anything. For Ryan, it was his image as the golden son, the dependable one, the kind of man a wealthy in-law family would trust. I didn't go after them directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I started making quiet moves that looked like nothing on the surface. A casual coffee with one of Dad's longtime clients where I accidentally mentioned the big deposit I'd given him for work that never happened to lie, but one I could make sound like the truth. a lunch with one of Mom's charity board members, where I asked if she'd heard about the private expenses coming out of the event budget, never naming her, just planting the seed. A friendly chat with Ryan's future father-in-law, where I mentioned how generous it was of Ryan to take money from me for his wedding, watching the man's polite smile freeze in place. These weren't confrontations. They were slow leaks. Drip by drip, I made sure their reputations had tiny hairline cracks, nothing visible to them yet, but enough to weaken the structure. While that worked its way through their precious networks, I focused on the money. The envelope Ryan had taken was a decoy, stuffed with small bills and blanks. The real $50,000 was still safe in my personal account. But keeping it wasn't enough. I wanted to turn it into something they couldn't touch or reverse, something they'd have to see every time they looked at me. So I made a call to a contact I'd been holding on to for years, Mr. Evers, an older man who ran a small property management company. I'd done bookkeeping for him in my early 20s, and he'd once told me, "If you ever want to invest, I'll make sure it's worth your while." We met for coffee. I told him I wanted something small but visible, something in town. Within a week, I was a silent partner in one of his rental properties, a little shopfront right in the middle of downtown where everyone, including my parents, passed at least once a week. The paperwork had my name on it alone. But the shopfront wasn't going to stay empty. I had a tenant in mind, and she was perfect for the next stage of the plan. Marcy, one of the women from Mom's charity circle, had been looking for a cheaper location for her boutique after her lease jumped in price. I offered her a deal so good she couldn't refuse low rent in exchange for one simple thing. She would put my name on the lease in big gold letters in the front window. Owned by my name, right where Mom would see it every time she came downtown for her errands. By the time Ryan's wedding was 3 weeks away, the cracks I'd planted were starting to show. Dad was grumbling about false rumors in the contractors group. Mom was making extra phone calls to clear up misunderstandings with the board. Ryan's fiance's parents had gone from warm to politely distant. And not one of them knew I had anything to do with it. They thought they'd taken what mattered to me. They had no idea I was building something they couldn't touch, and that I was setting up the perfect moment to make them feel as small and powerless as they'd made me feel in that kitchen. The morning of Ryan's wedding, I didn't go to the venue early with the rest of the family. I'd RSVP'd yes weeks ago, but my presence there wasn't for celebration. It was for the final part of the plan. By the time I arrived, the cracks I'd been carving in their lives were already widening. Dad was outside the reception hall, jaw tight, phone pressed to his ear. I caught just enough of his conversation to know what had happened. The Contractor Association had put him under a review for unresolved client disputes. That quiet coffee I'd had with his old client, it had turned into a formal complaint after a few other members remembered similar incidents. I walked right past him without a word. The way his eyes darted away from mine told me he didn't want me near whatever mess he was trying to contain. Inside, Mom was pacing with 2 other women from her charity board. Her voice was sharp, almost pleading, as she explained why the boutique rent check from her friend Marcy had gone to me instead of the charity account. Apparently, one of the board members had passed by downtown and seen the gold lettering in Marcy's window, owned by my name, and asked how I'd managed to buy a shopfront on my salary. The answer had led straight to questions about where my savings had come from, and suddenly my mom's neat little version of events didn't line up. Ryan was harder to reach until I spotted his fiance's parents in a tight closed-door conversation with him. They were holding papers in their hands, and I knew exactly what they were. The accidental envelope of his overdue debts that had been mailed to their address 2 days ago had found its way into their hands. His future father-in-law's polite smile from earlier in the year was gone, replaced with a look that was somewhere between disgust and disbelief. I didn't need to cause a scene at the wedding. The damage was already spreading through every part of their lives, each one hit in the place that hurt the most. Dad's professional pride, Mom's social standing, Ryan's carefully constructed image as the responsible son. I stayed through the ceremony, sitting in the back, blending in with the extended relatives. I didn't approach them, didn't force a confrontation. Letting them stew in confusion, suspicion, and whispered judgment was far more satisfying than shouting across a table. When I left the reception, I walked the long way home, past the boutique. Marcy was in the window arranging a display of dresses, sunlight catching on the gold lettering with my name. I stood there for a minute, ribs still tender under my coat, and realized something: the money they'd tried to take was safe, but more importantly, the power they thought they had over me was gone. The next week, Dad's review turned into a suspension, costing him 2 big contracts. Mom's charity board voted her off after an emergency meeting. Ryan's wedding pictures went up online, but the in-law family looked stiff. The Smiles' brittle word was they'd taken over all financial control after the honeymoon. None of them confronted me directly. They didn't have to. Every time I walked into a room, their eyes said it all. They knew. They knew I'd done something. They just couldn't prove it. And that was better than any big public reveal. They would live the rest of their lives wondering when the next crack would appear, when the next thing they valued would slip through their fingers. They had smashed my ribs thinking they could take my future. Instead, I'd taken theirs piece by piece, in silence, until all they had left was the sound of their own reputations crumbling. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.